Hello everyone, my name is Cherie, and if you're new to my channel, welcome. Today I wanted to discuss something very interesting that I found inside of genomics literature on its ASR system. The ASR system is the accurate stitch regulator, and for those of you who are unaware, a stitch regulator is a system that creates even stitches when you are doing free motion quilting. And on the Janome system, it is compatible with two different sewing machines at the present moment, but I think that it may become more widespread across the Janome line as time goes on. I'm going to go ahead and read to you the statement, and then I'll talk more about what my thoughts are on it. It says, why aftermarket stitch regulators are not recommended. Some brands offer aftermarket stitch regulators that affix to machines. These aftermarket stitch regulators are not recommended for use. For a stitch regulator to work properly, the sensor must pick up on the movement of the fabric and communicate the speed back to the machine. This is not possible without connecting the unit to the machine. This is also why our accurate stitch regulator is not compatible with older Janome models, because those models do not have the technology built into the machine to communicate with the accurate stitch regulator or any aftermarket stitch regulator products. Now, I read a lot into that statement because when you have a proprietary stitch regulator, usually there is a software inside of the sewing machine itself that communicates with a sensor that is in the needle plate. The sensor in the needle plate reads the speed of the fabric, and then it communicates that back to the sewing machine's software so that the speed of the needle can be adjusted. Now, here is where Janome is not really telling the full story when it comes to the statement that they made, because on a third-party stitch regulator, it works a little bit differently. On a third-party stitch regulator, it usually has a control panel that sticks to the back of your sewing machine, and then they usually have some sort of sensor located somewhere that measures the speed of the fabric. And when the speed of the fabric is recorded, then that information is sent back to the controller via some cords. So that is how it works differently, and it's pretty much 100% bypasses the sewing machine itself. For example, on the AccuStitch system, they give you a controller, a custom needle plate with a sensor in it, and they also give you a foot control. That foot control attaches to the sewing machine itself and also to the control panel. So when the signal is sent from the sensor to the control panel, it feeds it back to the foot control to adjust the speed. So in it working that way, it completely bypasses the need to communicate with the sewing machine's computer. So that is why I really did find the statement from Janome very interesting, because it's as if they're really discouraging you from using a third-party system, even though third-party systems still do work on many different model sewing machines. You just really have to check and see if that particular kind will be compatible with yours. One of the systems that I personally find most interesting is the system from Grace Company, because that particular system requires you to have a quilting frame, which pretty much converts your standard sewing machine to a long arm. The only difference is that most quilting sewing machines like your Juki 2010 QI has a smaller throat space than that is on a long arm. However, it still gives you somewhat of that experience when you hook up your standard Juki to your Grace quilting frame, and then also get the Grace company Sure Stitch, which is what they call their stitch regulator. Their stitch regulator attaches to the frame more so than it does to the sewing machine, and I find that interesting. Also, I like that it has this color display on the front of it. So also, when I was doing a lot of my research about the stitch regulators, I found that Bernina was the brand that had the most BSR compatible sewing machines in their lineup. BSR just means Bernina stitch regulator. So everybody is giving their regulator a different acronym, but of course Bernina was the first in the game. So obviously they're going to have the most sewing machines that are BSR compatible. If you haven't already, please do give this stream a thumbs up. I will not be responding to your comments live, but what I will do is respond to your comments in the chat, as it's much easier for me to respond in the chat than it is for me to interrupt the stream. So another thought that I had about free motion quilting is that there is a big decision to make when you decide to quilt, whether or not you would like to learn free motion by hand, or if you would like to use a stitch regulator as an assist. For me personally, I found it beneficial to start trying to learn free motion, but those who are very seasoned at it make it look so darn easy, while me, when I do some free motion quilting, it looks like I am writing in kindergarten print. That stuff looks terrible, but I think that I will improve with the more practice that I get with it. So I definitely understand why some people decide to use a stitch regulator instead to help out, as fabric and stuff is super expensive. The other thing to take into consideration is whether or not you would like to sit down and free motion or have more of the long arm quilting experience. If you would like to have the long arm experience, you're more so pigeonholed into using the Grace company system, as that is the most readily available one right now. But if you would like to sit down in free motion, then you have a little bit more options, because you can either go with the AccuStitch system, a Janome, or a Bernina sewing machine. I am very curious to know what system you all use for your stitch regulator, and I think that I will leave a little questionnaire over on my community tab just out of curiosity. I don't think I'm going to hold this video out any longer. I thank you all so much for tuning in to this stream, and I'll catch you on the next one.